What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the RGR Football Channel. My name is Daniel Harms, Senior Film Analyst today, and we continue our Dinner with the Enemy series. Today, we're talking Las Vegas Raiders. I have a very special guest, Matt Holder. You can find him on Twitter at mholder95. He's a contributor at Silver Black Pride and an NFL draft content writer for Bleacher Report. Matt, thank you for joining us. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, man. How about you? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's right now. I'm currently in Texas doing this, and it's 112 degrees. So I'm based out of Missouri usually, and even before that, I was in Nebraska and Northern California before that. This is a different kind of heat than I'm used to, so it's definitely different. But I'm glad we were able to connect for this conversation because as much as it's been one-sided for this back and forth, this division rivalry, is still one of the best rivalries in sports, in my opinion. They consistently have fire on the field. I mean, if you guys didn't watch Quarterback, the Netflix show, you should go back and watch that because there's really detailed analysis and showing how Patrick Mahomes and Max Crosby were going back and forth during the season. That was a lot of fun. So there's a lot of chippiness here. And before we get into the offense and the defense and nuts and bolts, I want to get your general temperature around the Las Vegas Raiders right now as training camp is now opened. How's everyone feeling right now?
Yeah, I think right now it's kind of tough to be positive. I think the Raiders are going through a little bit of a transitionary period, if you will, if you can catch my drift. They're not going to say the word rebuilding, partially out of respect for guys like Devontae Adams and Max Crosby, especially Devontae, who's 30 now, and Max is obviously entering the prime of his career. They're not going to outwardly say that, but they've also said some stuff like, we're not going to judge the season on wins and losses, but on the development of young players. Well, that's a nice way of saying rebuilding. You just explained the definition right there without saying the word. So I think it's kind of looking at this year, I'm kind of looking at it through that lens too, of who are the guys that they can continue to count on throughout the season. And, the wins as they come are going to be great. But I'm not exactly holding out a whole lot of hope. Hopefully that's a good sign. In years past, I've been a lot more excited. I was excited going into last year and, obviously got disappointed. So we'll see. But yeah, it's definitely going into this year feeling more like we're playing for 2024 in this sense.
Yeah, I remember the last couple of seasons from an outside perspective, they played better than I expected them to. Obviously, 2 years ago, making the playoffs, giving the Bengals a run for their money, probably had multiple opportunities to win that game last year. They had games where they should have won. They shouldn't have lost to the Colts, and some games that they probably shouldn't have won. They went back and forth with that. So the Raiders, at least in the last few years, have been hard to nail down. So I would imagine most of you are hoping that everything that's gone on this past offseason is a little harder to nail down as the season goes. If the team plays tough, which assuming that everyone plays for Josh McDaniels, that's how that will go, and you hopefully see some results that way. Because like you said, I do expect them to be retooling, rebuilding, however you want to call it, with this stopgap quarterback as it is. And we all kind of understand what Jimmy Garoppolo is at this point in his career, and that is a point-and-shoot quarterback. Your offensive coordinator, your head coach is going to be like, hey, guess what? You do this. He's like, yeah, I got you. I'm not going to do anything differently. So we kind of don't necessarily have to talk too much about Jimmy Garoppolo. So I want to get into the nuts and bolts of the offense because right now, you talked about Devontae Adams, who is not exactly the happiest camper right now. We know that he's come out, said a few things about his relationship with players, some things aren't going well. So right now, in the wide receiver room, I'm going to jumble up some of the questions here, but rumors are circling. I don't know if they're accurate, but Hunter Renfrow possibly on the out with Josh McDaniels, the wide receiver room. I don't necessarily, like I said, believe that. But outside of Devontae Adams, what's this offense going to look like for the wide receivers and tight ends and the pass catchers?
Yeah, I do actually think that's probably the strength of the team as a whole, especially the wide receivers. As far as the Hunter Renfrow rumors go, those have kind of quieted down, obviously with his contract and, him having a down year last year. I think that's the biggest reason why those popped up. Been multiple reports that they're not really shopping them, nor have they received any offers. I think, from the general sense of it as it is, on August 7th right now, it seems like he's going to be on the roster for week 1. If he does get moved, maybe it's closer to the trade deadline or something like that. But right now, it does seem like Hunter Renfrow is going to be safe and going to be on the team. And he's been playing well. The reports are playing that he's playing well in training camp. They signed Jacoby Myers in the offseason, who I think really does fit Jimmy Garoppolo's skill set well. Like you mentioned, Jimmy Garoppolo is not much of a strong arm quarterback that's going to push the ball down the field. But if you look at some of Jacoby Myers' stats, some of his best areas in the field were around that intermediate range and over the middle too, which is where Garoppolo has shown some promise in the past too. So I like that. And then obviously you have Devontae, like you guys are showing right here, arguably the best receiver in the game. Guy will make anybody look like an all-pro back there at quarterback or anything like that. I mean, coming off a heck of a year last year, even with Derek Carr playing one of his worst. And two, I'm really excited to see what Michael Mayer can do as a pass catcher, as that rookie tight end. You know, a lot of people, including myself, had him as the best tight end coming out of the draft last year. Raiders get him in the second round, which, you know, to me is my favorite pick so far, favorite pick of their draft during the season. So it'll be interesting to see how that group gels. Again, you know, hopefully they can work with Jimmy Garoppolo and, you know, make him at least a serviceable passer to let them shine. But yeah, I'm also interested to see how Jacoby Myers and Hunter Renfrow can work together in the slot, which is, again, reports so far in camp that those guys have been gelling. So we'll see how it goes.
That's awesome. I mean, honestly, it's a good group. Like, it's not outside of Devontae Adams. I mean, he's an all-pro player. Like, that's not going to be very hard to say, hey, Jimmy, just kind of target Devontae. Like, we don't have to really worry so much about how it's going to work, and especially if they're going to use him in downfield. It's not necessarily Jimmy's strength, but he can get the ball down the field, especially if you get a couple of those completions. It's going to help Jacoby Myers. It's going to help Hunter Renfrow in the intermediate. You saw, you know, how open the middle of the field was on that play against the Chiefs last year. So it does tend to lend itself to helping out the rest of your players. And again, Michael Mayer was my tight end one in this draft as well. And obviously, put the tinfoil hat on. Josh McDaniels understands how to use big-bodied tight ends from his time in New England. So this isn't anything out of the question for him. I like the addition of Austin Hooper as well. It's going to allow them to use those two tight end sets and run the ball. We'll see exactly who's going to be running the football, as we're going to get to that here.
The other big question.
But, yeah, exactly. So you have an experienced guy in Austin Hooper, and then a rookie who's honestly, he's good everywhere. He's a good pass catcher. He's a good blocker. And I think he's going to be a very good player in the NFL for the Raiders going forward. But that does bring us to Josh Jacobs. So last year, he had a career year in terms of number of snaps, carries, yards per carry, yards, touchdowns. He tied for his most touchdowns on the season last year. So fantastic player. He wants to get paid. Do you think he's going to report to camp and play this season for the Las Vegas Raiders?
Report to camp, it doesn't look like it. You know, it's been kind of, even before the deadline had passed, there had been rumors and like reports that he wasn't going to show up without a long-term deal. So no one's expecting him to be there. Even if you talk to like Josh McDaniels right now, he's still optimistic that Jacobs will show up, but doesn't seem to expect him anytime soon. You know, maybe the last week of camp or something like that to get his legs underneath him and get some reps in or get some extra week of practice. But yeah, as of right now, it does not seem like Jacobs reporting to camp. The good news is it does seem like all signs are pointing to him at least being there for week one. Now, how much does the lost time affect the guy? I'd argue that he's the rushing champ and he'll be just fine. But yeah, who's going to run the ball and how they operate this year will be interesting too. Because again, you know, this season's a little bit more about 2024. So maybe a guy like Zamir White ends up getting more touches than he did last year, or a lot more touches than he did last year because he barely got any because they're trying to develop him. And, you know, that'll definitely be something I don't know how many Chiefs fans are paying attention to Raiders in August and preseason, but definitely be wanting to tune in to see how he does. Because the better Zamir White does, honestly, the better it is for the future of the Raiders, especially if Josh Jacobs isn't in their future plans, which it kind of seems like all signs are pointing to that, going back to last year when they added 4 running backs and declined his fifth-year option, essentially making it a contract year for him. So, yeah, Jacobs is a tricky situation, one that a lot of people want answers to, that unfortunately there aren't a whole lot at this time other than doesn't look like he's showing up, but he should be there for the regular season.
Yeah, you're looking at the depth chart. I mean, I don't necessarily know if this is how it's going to play out. I would imagine Zamir White ends up being the running down back because you have Amir Abdullah, Brandon Bolin. Both guys are more pass-catching backs, have worked with Josh McDaniels in the past, especially, you know, Abdullah last year and Bolin the previous year. So Zamir White coming out of Georgia was really more of a 1-2 down player. He paired with James Cook now is with the Bills, and everyone's talking about his pass catching ability. So he's a good 1-2 back. And obviously, as a Raiders fan, you want to be able to say Josh Jacobs is going to play the majority of those snaps and come in and be the guy that he was last year, because that gives them not only the best chance to win, but all signs point to the team thinking that they can still win games. Like, they want to win games. They want to be able to say that this is a retooling season and not a rebuilding season, because when you do rebuild, you have to strategically, I'm going to put this in quotations because they won't say it. They have to strategically lose games. Like, they really do, to be able to get themselves in position to get a top quarterback or a Marvin Harrison to pair with Devontae Adams, if that's going to end up being what it is. So watching Josh Jacobs play, he was not what I expected coming out of Alabama. I think he was really typecasted as a pass catching back because of the way that they used him there and the different ways that they use running backs in Alabama. But last year really showed you his value as a running back, and obviously that's why he's currently holding out. The whole situation with running backs right now in the NFL it's disappointing. Obviously, we all want players to get paid, and I definitely think he's deserving of a contract. But as Josh McDaniels himself, going back to his time with New England, paying a running back is not necessarily in their DNA. It's not in the NFL's DNA right now. So unfortunately, that's what they're probably looking at. I'm hopeful, again, because I do believe that all these players deserve to get paid, and Josh Jacobs is one of the players that does absolutely deserve to get paid. And behind an offensive line that last year I was not expecting to have as good of a year they did as the run blocking department. And do you think this offensive line is this year for Jimmy Garoppolo is going to allow him to be his best? You know, we kind of typecast Jimmy as this play action throw guy, really more of exploit the middle of the field, and the deep shots, the outside the numbers throws aren't necessarily where he's going to attack. So it shouldn't be too difficult to allow him to get the ball out quickly with those play actions. But going with this offensive line, we've seen taking shots on, Alex Leatherwood, who didn't pan out. How is the offensive line shaping up for you?
Yeah, I mean, the start at left tackle is going to be Colton Miller. I feel like he's one of the most underrated tackles in the league overall. I mean, guy should be a Pro Bowler. So that's the one spot that they're really keen on, or really good at. At left guard, they're going to have Dylan Parham. I feel like Parham, I'm hopeful that he's having a big year. I thought he showed some promise last year, especially as a run blocker, but in pass protection, did give up. If you go look on PFF, did give up, some of the most pressures and sacks and all that stuff. Definitely needs to clean that part of his game up. But one of the biggest things is he's really struggled with a lot of stunts and line games. So it was when he was thinking or having to react quickly, where you could kind of tell as a rookie who also was learning three different positions, playing right guard, center, and left guard. To start, I think, in the first 4 games of his NFL career, which is just a lot to throw at a guy, especially a first-year player. Mm-hmm. So this year, and he's talked about it a little bit during training camp and spring practices, where the game's starting to slow down a little bit for him. So I think having that experience will help him play better and help, again, especially in pass protection. Andre James at center, he's a guy that I think a lot of people, myself included, have been hopeful for. He might take the next step over the last 2 years. He's just kind of been average. He's going to be a good player in pass protection, just not going to give you much as a run blocker, converted tackle. So he's kind of a guy that you can get by with right now, just not a guy that you're really excited about. Right guard's the biggest question right now, what they're going to do. I mean, I'm sure as Chiefs fans can remember I think, was it week 18? I think Chris Jones ate Alex Barr's lunch.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, Chris Jones is a great player. He was not the only one to kick Alex Barr's ass last year. So that's definitely one of the biggest spots that I'm looking for this year. They brought in a guy like Greg Van Roten, who's a veteran that's had some starting experience, but a little bit more of a journeyman. Maybe he's an upgrade. We'll see. And then they have Nate Moody, who they got off the Broncos practice squad, who's kind of that third runner in that race, that is the younger guy that could have more potential. And right tackle's kind of open right now too. Jermaine Illuminor had a career year last year, but Jermaine Illuminor has also gotten made it to the second team in training camp because of penalties, which was an issue for him during the regular season last year. That was the one almost black mark on his resume last year, where he did commit way too many penalties, led the team in that category, was one of the worst among offensive tackles. And Thayer Munford, who was a 7th-round pick last year, played well as kind of that 6th offensive lineman, that swing tackle. And, he's been taking the first-team reps there. I would be excited if Munford gets there because, again, looking towards 2024, seeing what that guy can do for you. And, again, it would be a great value as a 7th-rounder who's ended up being a starter in year 2. But, yeah, big question marks on the right side right now for the Raiders. And we'll see how Parham can develop. But definitely an area where I think the Chiefs will probably have a little bit of an advantage with Chris Jones on their side of the ball.
But that's assuming that, Chris Jones gets his contract in place this year, which I mean, he's already foregone at least almost $1 million in fines. So I don't expect him to not play the season, especially because, you think if you want to get paid, you're still going to have to show, look, yeah, I have to be able to get out here and perform. So we all expect him to. If this is like week 2 of the preseason and it's still not happening, we're going to have some questions and things are going to get a little crazy out here. But regardless, the offensive line, I think, consistency, continuity, important. So that's why you see some of the players like you talked about with Illuminor and Bars that are currently slotted in to be there right now. And if you had to pick one guy from this offensive line, maybe even backups to surprise some people, even, you guys themselves this year into some playing time, who would you pick?
I think I got to go back to my guy, Moody. He was the guy that I liked a lot coming out of Fresno State, just battled a lot of injuries, even in college, and that's kind of continued to haunt him in the NFL. Dude who's strong as a bull. I think who's kind of surprising. For whatever it's worth, the Madden ratings came out, and he was a top 10 offensive lineman in strength, which for a guy that's battling for a roster spot is, pretty impressive. It cranked out like 45 reps on the bench press when he was there. So I'm excited to see what he can do. Another guy where if he can get playing time, if he can earn that starting job, even better for the Raiders, someone who's younger and that they can develop. So he's my guy that I have circled in as I'm hoping ends up winning the job and earning that starting spot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially for a guard. You want to use that strength in an offensive line that they want to play more 12, more 21, get established to run, things like that. It makes a lot of sense to want to go in that direction. So right now, at least, I think that collectively the offense could be an average group this year. I think that's a good approach looking at their offensive line. They have good playmakers. They obviously have Devontae Adams. It's not a bad thing to start when that's the guy that you start off with, even if he might be a little unhappy. Hopefully that irons out for the Raiders the rest of the season. So let's talk about the thorn in the side of the Raiders for the last, honestly, it's been before Patrick Mahomes took over as a quarterback, but let's focus a little bit since then. Since Patrick has taken over as the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs in 2018, the Raiders have finished 32nd in points per game at 29.2, 24th, 26.2 points per game, 30th, and 29.9, 26th, 25.8, and 26th and 24.4 points per game. That's a lot of points per game and in the bottom of the league nearly every single year. So is there any reason to expect this year that their defense is going to get exponentially better? Because in this division, with these quarterbacks, these weapons, they need to be able to stop them at some point. So how are you overall expecting the defense to look this year?
I mean, about the same. I don't think it's going to be much different. Unfortunately, again, there's a lot of young pieces on defense. They didn't add outside of Marcus Peters, who they signed 2 weeks ago. They didn't really add any big name free agents. Marcus Epps was like their biggest name, and no disrespect to Marcus Epps, I think he's a solid player. But if that's your biggest signing on the side of the ball with the numbers that you just listed off, not exactly a great free agency period. Hopefully Tyree Wilson can get in, get healthy, and get some playing time. He's still on the NFI list with that foot injury he suffered at Texas Tech. Byron Young just came off PUP. He's a guy that I'm excited about. Maybe he can mix in at defensive tackle. That was one of the Raiders' biggest weaknesses on defense last year, and they lost their best player in Andrew Billings at that spot from a year ago. So he's a guy that I think can maybe mix it up and maybe end up surprising people and start cracking the starting lineup, because Bilal Nichols and Jerry Tillery didn't do anything to come into training camp saying that they're a lock to start. Really, Max Crosby's the only guy that can really say that right now. And then, at nose, they have a young guy, Neil Farrell, that hopefully can start coming along, but I believe he's still on the NFI list too. So between a lot of injuries on the defensive line, and especially in their younger players, and, an underwhelming offseason, I'm not expecting much. That's definitely, especially in the cornerback room, Marcus Peters gives them a boost. And I think they have a lot of solid players, but nobody outside of Peters who has a great resume. And who knows how great that guy can be with being magic age of 30 and 2 years removed from a torn ACL. So hopefully he can get back to, his multi-interception season, but not exactly a comforting sight from this group heading into the season.
Yeah. I mean, we're looking right now at Jonathan Taylor going pretty much untouched for a 60-plus yard touchdown against them last year. It's not a great thing when you talk about their defensive line. They've had some struggles stopping the run. If you do slot Jerry Tillery in there as a starter, you know you're not getting much out of him from a run stopping perspective. He's pretty much a pass rush only kind of player. And when you have that on your defensive line, it becomes difficult to really stop offenses. And one guy you mentioned, Byron Young, was a huge. I was a huge fan of Byron Young coming out of Alabama. It felt like if he was ever one-on-one blocked, he was not being blocked properly. He'd get off of that very quickly. Really strong, short area player that I was really impressed with. And when I go back to this team, one of the areas that, obviously passing in the NFL right now is just at an all-time high. It's being more effective than ever. But what that's done is made rushing more effective in the NFL. Last year, we've seen it all over the offseason. Was the most efficient, the most effective from a yards per carry perspective. The quarterback rush has been the quarterback scramble has been the most efficient play in the NFL over the last couple of seasons now. So being able to stop the run, getting after the quarterback is a really important job. And you talked about the youth of this defense, and I'm actually excited about some of the players that they drafted. You look at Jacorian Bennett, Chris Smith, Tyree Wilson, Byron Young. These are guys that could be starters for them for years to come. So I do think that they have some good young players on their team. And when you're trying to figure out this retooling period for an organization, it's nice to have at least the cupboard's not barren. They're full of some players. I like Demeek Robinson coming out of Louisiana Tech. We'll see if he can get in the role there anywhere. But you talked about the cornerback room. This group it's full of a lot of players. And obviously with
a lot of bodies in the room, that's for sure.
A lot of bodies. Marcus Peters comes in as probably their best corner. Maybe Nate Hobbs has the upper hand on him at this point in their careers, coming off of his best season, if I'm not mistaken. But Peters brings that more of a man coverage player who's a ball hawk. He doesn't necessarily care as much about getting in the run game, tackling. He wants to get the football. So that's another area you can hope to add to. So when we're looking at the Raiders from the secondary perspective, what starters right now do you think give the Raiders the best chance, especially to stop the quarterbacks that they have to face in the AFC West?
I think right now it's probably going to be it's probably going to be a couple of guys you mentioned, Peters and Hobbs. Where exactly Hobbs starts or plays will kind of be a little bit of a question. Probably in his rookie year, he was more of a slot guy with Gus Bradley and playing a lot of cover 3. And then when they brought in Patrick Graham, he likes to run a lot of cover 2. He played a little bit more outside where he had safety help over the top because that's kind of his biggest area of weaknesses. He will get beat deep, but he is a physical guy that can come up and make plays against the run and make form tackles. And then beyond that, the third spot's really up for grabs. From what we've been hearing in training camp, David Long Jr. was a free agent they brought over from the Rams, who I honestly didn't think much of when they brought him over, but he's been one of the standouts, been running with the ones, especially now that Brandon Faison went down with an injury last week. So those are probably the three favorites. The guy that I like and I'm really curious about is one you mentioned already, Jacorian Bennett. Is a rookie it's going to be a rookie that showed a lot of promise at Maryland. Played in press man coverage, played inside, played outside, and I think that versatility will really help him, especially in year one as he tries to find a role. If you can play 2 spots, you just make it easier for the coaching staff to put you on the field. So he's a guy that I'm kind of encouraged with. I don't think he'll be starting week 1, but as injuries start to happen and as the season progresses, I wouldn't be a surprise to see him rolling with the ones at some point and getting a little bit more action. Again, a guy that when I watched him on tape, I didn't know a ton about him before they drafted him, but I walked away with very impressed, especially with his skills and press man coverage. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's feisty and has plenty of ball skills. So that's the guy who I'm most excited about at the corners. And then the other guy too is Chris Smith, like you talked about. To me, Chris Smith would have been a second or third round pick had he had better times at the combine. Very instinctual, made a lot of plays at Georgia. Just didn't have those hand times, so we'll see how much that impacts him in the NFL. But 2 guys that I think, again, a lot of promise, a lot of potential that I think will be exciting to watch this year. It's just the overarching theme here of 2024 and beyond.
Yeah, and like I was talking about, and like you talked about these young players, I think that some of them are going to force themselves onto the field just out of you've seen these players before, and that are in front of them, and at some point you got to know what you have, especially Chris Smith and Bennett, who are probably going to play slot and safety and maybe interchange a little bit. Right now in the NFL, you're seeing a lot of teams use more 3 safety sets, whether that becomes they end up playing in the slot a little bit. And I think that both can play that to an extent. The instinctual ability that Chris Smith has allows him to be sometimes more of that kind of hole player in the middle of the field, where he just can kind of sit, read the quarterback, and he's not necessarily going to be asked to play a ton of man coverage because that's not the athletic ability of what he presents. But the instinctual aspect of that, reading an offense, seeing how things unfold, do allow him to be more instinctual in coverage, whether it's man or zone. And Jacorian Bennett blew up the combine. Like, he was one of the most athletic corners that was testing. So that made everyone go back and watch this film, and that's exactly what I did too. I was like, okay, we gotta see what's going on with this guy here, because you don't see most guys like that are untalked about come into the combine and just completely blow it up. And everyone was talking about Deontay Banks blowing up the combine, and then his teammate Bennett did, which was awesome to see when you have those kind of players come out. So just getting talent, whether it's instinctual, whether it's physical in nature, for a defense that's going through a lot of turnover changes, at least in the next few years, is very important with these young guys. So I'm personally, draft-wise, excited to watch this defense, because there's so many players that I was a fan of coming out, and that ties into, Tyree Wilson, if he's going to get healthy. He's in a good spot to get healthy. You have both Max Crosby and Chandler Jones as your defensive ends right now. So he's in a spot right now to learn, get healthy, get up to speed to the NFL game, which brings me to, he was their first round draft pick. Like, he's going to be the future of defensive end. Maybe right now, if he gets healthy, we're talking about Max Crosby, and then you have a 3-tech in Tyree Wilson or Chandler Jones, however they want to play that, with Chandler Jones on the outside or vice versa. So do you think that this defensive end group is the best in the AFC West?
I hesitate to say that a little bit, just because, the Chargers still have Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, so I'll still give them their flowers. Khalil Mack, obviously, I'm still bitter that the Raiders didn't keep him around, so I'll give them some. I have no problem giving those guys some flowers, but I think behind them, I definitely think they can. Biggest thing with Chandler Jones is Chandler Jones was pretty underwhelming last year. If he can get back to his form from even just a couple years ago, then I definitely think that the Raiders will have a cemented best defensive ends in the AFC West, and especially if Tyree Wilson can get healthy and start to put it together and show out what he did at Texas Tech. The potential there is definitely high for the Raiders. Another spot where, again, like you said, with a young guy in Tyree Wilson and a proven veteran in Chandler Jones and Max Crosby, who's now become a proven veteran, it is definitely their strongest position group on the defense for sure.
Max Crosby is an absolute ridiculous freight train. I did a defensive end top 10 list with JP Acosta of SB Nation a few months ago, or actually about a month ago, and he ended up being my 4th defensive end in the NFL. He is actually, no, I lied. He's my 3rd. He is so good. Run defense, he's probably the best run defender in the NFL from a defensive end perspective. You can't run away from him. You can't run at him. It doesn't really matter what you do. He's this athlete, like you're going to see here. He's going to come or loop around, almost fall down, and then still make the sack on a quarterback getting out of the pocket. Like, what he's able to do from a pass rush perspective, the spin move is ridiculous. He has all the tools with his hands, and just the short area ability that he possesses with his speed off the edge and relentless motor. He's a fantastic defensive end, and he's entering the prime of his career. So I would actually I personally believe that their room with a healthy Tyree Wilson is the best defensive end room in the NFL. And the reason I say that is because if Tyree Wilson is healthy, he can get on the field. He can get on those first and second down snaps for Chandler Jones, which I think the bigger problem for him last year was he wasn't producing a ton in the pass rush department. But if you don't have to make him a run defender, you can then unleash him in those third down packages. You can move him around, Tyree Wilson around. So I think that will make him more productive. It'll make him obviously not as tired going throughout the game. So they're in a really good spot with their defensive ends. It's all really going to come down to the defensive tackles and the linebackers, which I realized that I didn't put on here, which is an oversight on my part. I don't know much about the linebackers here
No worries.
in Las Vegas. I was looking at the depth chart, Spillane, Diablo, and if I'm not, who's the other guy that I'm
Masterson.
Yeah, Masterson. And then they also have Darius Harris, who played in Kansas City last year. So there's a lot going on here. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't Diablo a safety coming out of college?
Yeah, he's a safety at Virginia Tech. Yeah.
Okay, so you're gonna have to fill me in here. Like, what's going on with the linebackers? What are some of the strengths and weaknesses of this group specifically?
So with the Raiders linebackers, it's kind of been a frustrating thing over the last few years where everyone's pointed at it and everyone acknowledges that they need linebackers. The best linebacker that they've had in the last 20 years probably was Denzel Perryman, who they let walk in the offseason. It was a Pro Bowler 2 years ago. So it's kind of a big question mark when you're telling me what's the strengths and the weaknesses. It's hard to say right now. Divine Diablo is coming in wearing the green dot. He's actually surprisingly, even though he's a converted safety, been better in coverage better in against the run than he has in coverage, which again, somewhat shocking. He's still, when we watched, we were breaking him down the other day on our podcast, Tape Don't Lie. And one of the biggest things that was clear is he's still thinking. He's still not used to playing on that second level, a little bit closer to the line of scrimmages where things happen faster, and he's not quite up to speed just yet. So the part of the problem is his rookie year, he didn't start playing until week 12. And then this past year, he got injured and hurt his forearm in week 8 and missed the rest of the season. So he's played 2 years, but he's really played one season's worth of games. So that's kind of the struggle while he enters the pivotal third year. And then behind him, Spillane was there, another free agent signing, just kind of a meh signing, if you will, just an average player who doesn't really get you excited. He's probably going to do his job, but not exactly a ton of potential there. And then behind him, Luke Masterson, another converted safety. If you look at Patrick Graham, the guys that he likes to work with, the Jabril Peppers, he played a lot at linebacker, and he likes those athletic linebacker types, typically that are converted safeties or whatnot. So that's definitely his type. And, the highest draft pick they spent was Amari Burney in the 6th round this past year, who is a good coverage linebacker, but again, another converted safety who can't really play against the run right now. So it's a big question mark for this position group. Definitely the one that kind of gets me probably the least excited out of all of them. We're talking about the defensive line, guys like Tyree Wilson, Byron Young, back end and the secondary, Christopher Smith and Ja'Cory Bennett having bright futures. The Raiders and the linebackers, there's just not really that guy. Maybe you can say Divine Diablo if he can end up taking that next step this year, but we haven't seen enough from him at this point. So it's definitely their biggest area of weakness on defense, and definitely one of those things where you go into the season thinking, are they going to be looking at linebackers in the offseason next year, or are they going to finally start prioritizing that position?
Yeah, that kind of puts even more pressure on your defensive line and the defensive tackles,
exactly.
Especially in the run game, is to be able to keep those gaps open, especially if they're having trouble reading at linebacker. You have to be able to see things a little clearer. If it's muddier, that directly impacts how they're going to play. So interesting that they like some converted safeties, which, I don't have any issues with that. I like converted safeties. And I remember liking Diablo coming out as a coverage player. So it's interesting you've mentioned that he's better against the run. Maybe it's just bigger bodies. I don't know. He's having to cover some tight ends or some quicker running backs. I'm not entirely sure. But
he's a lot. I was just saying he's a lot better in man than he is in zone. So again, when he doesn't have to think and he can just play football, I think he kind of taps into that natural athleticism that he's had in the past. But yeah, whenever he has to think, it just takes a second too long, or he ends up a step too far one way.
I guess that makes sense to being a safety. You kind of see things unfold and you play naturally with your instincts. And so, I guess that actually makes a lot of sense. And especially learning the green dot, like you said, you have to think more. You have to learn more. Coming from safety to play a green dot as a linebacker, that's a kind of really big change, and it doesn't get harped on enough. One of the reasons Isaiah Simmons, playing in Arizona, having to change positions, learn new things. Now he's playing safety, from what I understand, this season for Arizona. So maybe they'll finally figure everything out with him. But converting can be really hit or miss, especially with these learning green dots for linebackers. So the last thing. Last year in the week 5, the Raiders nearly pulled off the upset, beating the Chiefs, so they lost 30-31. With the group that you see right now, do you think that they have a good chance this year to pull off that upset?
I really don't. It's if they can pull off a 1-point loss, I'll count that in a victory. We're covering the spread over there and keeping the gamblers happy. But yeah, this year, I mean, I look at this Raiders team. I don't think they're that much worse than last year, but I don't think they're better. And looking at the Chiefs, they're kind of just the same. As long as they have number 15 back there, they're going to be a Super Bowl contender. I just have a hard time seeing the Raiders really being able to compete with them at this current moment. It is one of those games where it's they'll throw out the record book and let them play on the field. Anything can happen. But yeah, as of right now, going into the season, I'm not holding out much hope for the Raiders competing with the Chiefs in the division or even in any of the games. I feel like those games could get pretty ugly pretty soon. So pretty quickly.
Yeah, they're usually fun. The first one's usually fun. The second, the last one we saw that it just didn't matter. They were pulling snow globe out on the Raiders to get ready for
doing Dosi or whatever before the plays. That was rough moment.
At least you have one thing over the Broncos. They had lost 13 straight games to the Chiefs, so you have one thing that they really go for. But Matt, thank you so much for coming on with me. Let everyone know where they can find you and what you're going to be working on.
Yeah, so like you said, you can follow me on Twitter at mholder95. Post pretty much everything on there. Find my work. Keep tabs on the Raiders. Also do a ton of NFL draft work with Bleacher Report. Scout the front seven. So I know the Chiefs could always use some defensive linemen to get Chris Jones some help and some linebackers as well. So so check me out. I'll be posting, during draft season, I'll be posting a bunch of clips and all that good stuff. So, and dropping some scouting reports. So appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Definitely follow him if you don't want to follow him for the Raider stuff, which I understand. Draft content, absolutely a must follow for draft content. So make sure you're following him at mholder95 on Twitter. You guys know me at InHarmsWay19. You can get me there. Here we're going to be doing this one more time for the Broncos before the season starts. And now we are in the thick of it. We got preseason games happening later this week for the Chiefs. Everyone's starting. This is almost the end of the offseason. We're almost there, just a few more weeks, and we get to watch real football on TV, you guys. I hope you enjoyed getting to know the Raiders a little bit better, to see the team that the Chiefs will be playing the rest of the season, and then going forward, some of the players that they'll have on their roster in the next few years. So, again, I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. We'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.